It's called a credit default swap. Credit default swaps are private insurance contracts between banks, hedge funds, even rich individuals, essentially bets that an investment, even a really complex one, will go on paying what it promised. The credit default swap market is completely unregulated, although tens of trillions of dollars worth are already thought to be in circulation. Washington-based lawyer Jack Blum, a veteran financial investigator, says this lack of regulation meant there was no way to check that the people involved in these swaps actually had the cash to back up their promises.
The way I describe this is a couple of one-legged drunks propping each other up. When you slice through it all this credit default swap does is give the patina of security to debt instruments and arrangements which really aren't worth much.
And if things go wrong, what happens?
What happens is everybody's looking to everybody else who has nothing to pay with. And what we get out of that is a death spiral. Death spiral means I go to collect mine from somebody who can't pay me. And in turn, I'm supposed to pay somebody else, but now I can't pay him because I couldn't collect from the other guy. And it's this circle, this downward circle of nobody can pay anybody else that is what I fear is the next step in this default swap business.
Stock markets around Europe have fallen sharply. During the past week, shares in London have lost more than 20% of their value. More than £91 billion has been wiped off the stock market today.
While stock markets around the world were crashing earlier this month, officials in New York were struggling to estimate how big the credit default swap bill from the now bankrupt Lehman's was likely to be. Their guess was something over $200 billion, a huge loss, and one which has contributed to the present financial chaos. The bad news is the Lehman's credit default swaps are only a tiny percentage of the total now out there. Former top regulator Michael Greenberger says the swap market grew so massive because, as long as house prices went on rising, there were so few claims on the insurance it provided.
It was insurance without backing, and the people who were issuing the insurance were part of this utopian group who said, oh, this is a risk-free investment. Housing prices will always go up. Mortgages will always be paid. The insurance won't have to be paid, and we're getting premiums. It's like we're insuring the fact that the sun will rise in the east in the morning. Well, much to the surprise of everyone, the sun, figuratively speaking, rose in the west. That is to say, housing prices dropped. People needed to collect on the so-called insurance that wasn't regulated like insurance. The capital reserves weren't there. And most of these big losses can't be paid off. These contracts are exploding, and every time they explode, you're talking about billions and billions of dollars, and we don't know where they're held. They are all over the place, and as the economy sinks, these insurance policies get triggered faster and faster, and they come up and bite you in the rear.
But the size of loss, I mean, does anyone have any idea? I mean, what is your guess?
I wouldn't even begin to guess. The figure is very, very high. The fact of the matter is the losses are potentially unending.
Both sides of the Atlantic now echo to the sound of regulatory stable doors being slammed. But according to Chris Dixon, a former director of Britain's Serious Fraud Office and now head of the Accountants' Joint Disciplinary Body, when it comes to investigation of what went wrong, there's a major difference. While American criminal, civil and political investigations are rapidly picking up pace, in Britain, where so much of the financial engineering actually happened, he says very little is going on.
As far as regulatory and criminal investigations are concerned, of course, that's a matter both for the FSA and for the authorities, and we haven't heard of anything happening there. It's not often that one sees the sort of intensive criminal investigation or indeed regulatory investigation that one sees in the United States.
Why do you think that is?
It's just not the way I'm afraid things are done here.
But why not? Clearly something massive has happened and we're threatened with economic depression. Isn't it something we ought to find out about?
Yes, one thought it most certainly is something that should be found out about. We need to find out what has gone on, and where people have transgressed, I think it's extremely important that they're called to account. It is depressing that nothing is happening.
As governments round the world start to take over the banking system to try to avoid financial collapse, Michael Greenberger says there's a final twist to this story. Because if the lawyers do eventually succeed in winning huge damages from banks on behalf of the investors they represent, guess who'll have to pay?
It's the highest form of irony here. We started out saying the free market is king and the government is in the way, and we end up with the government owning the financial services system and picking up the tab for the mistakes.
So the governments are going to pick up the tabs?
Absolutely. And that means you and me.